When a wide-eyed little boy races into a packed courthouse, clutching a worn dinosaur in his arms, onlookers assume it's just a heartbreaking family drama. Yet as the puzzle pieces lock into place, they reveal a mystery far darker than anyone ever imagined. Before we dive into this gripping story, let us know in the comments where you're reading from, and if you believe in speaking out for the truth, don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Owen, can you please repeat what you just said? The lawyer's voice quivered, caught between disbelief and awe. The courtroom, which had been abuzz just moments earlier, now descended into an uncanny hush. Every gaze fell on the small boy perched on the witness stand, his feet barely reaching the edge of the seat. In his arms, he clutched a tattered plush dinosaur, its worn fabric suggesting it had braved countless storms by his side. I said, Owen's voice was quiet but unwavering, Daddy didn't do it. But I know who did. Gasps rippled through the courtroom like waves striking jagged rocks. The judge leaned forward, his gavel hovering in midair, uncertain. Owen's mother covered her mouth with trembling fingers, tears streaming down her cheeks. The prosecutor, visibly startled, adjusted his glasses and frantically rifled through his notes. Even Owen's father, seated at the defense table with dark circles under his eyes, lifted his head in shock, a flicker of hope lighting his gaze for the first time in months. The lawyer pressed gently, Owen, can you tell us who it was? The boy lowered his eyes, stroking his dinosaur's tail as though seeking comfort. I can, he answered softly, raising his head to meet everyone's stare. But just before he could finish, the prosecutor leaped to his feet. Objection, Your Honor. The judge slammed his gavel. Order in the court. His voice reverberated. Still, the air felt charged, every breath seized by the suspense of what Owen might reveal next. It hadn't always been this way. Only a few months ago, the O'Connor family was as ordinary as any on their quiet suburban street. 8-year-old Owen, brimming with imagination, adored romping in the park with his dad, David, who was playful, kind, and forever indulged Owen's make-believe quests. Owen's mom, Catherine, worked long hours as a nurse, but when she was home, warmth and the aroma of freshly baked cookies permeated their small house. One balmy summer evening, while fireflies glowed outside the living room window, everything changed. David had kissed Owen goodnight and tucked him into bed as usual. But before dawn, the neighborhood lit up with flashing red and blue lights. Police cars jammed the driveway, and David was taken away in handcuffs. Daddy! Owen shrieked, darting downstairs in his pajamas. What's happening? Catherine held him back, her own face ashen and tight. Go back to your room, sweetheart, she whispered brokenly. Everything will be all right. But it wasn't all right. David stood accused of a crime so horrendous it rattled their household to its core. A neighbor, Mr. Atkins, had been assaulted in his home and left for dead. Witnesses swore they saw David fleeing the scene that night. Evidence appeared damning. David's fingerprints on the back door handle and his wallet discovered near the victim. Despite his protests of innocence, nobody seemed to believe him. Friends and neighbors withdrew, shunning the O'Connors. Whispers trailed Catherine and Owen wherever they went. At school, classmates treated Owen like a pariah, steered away by parents warning their children to avoid the criminal's kid. Catherine, overburdened by staggering legal bills, worked double shifts to stay afloat, yet she was clearly sinking. Owen tried to remain brave, hiding tears and pretending not to hear his mother crying herself to sleep. Still, he ached for his father and felt the piercing loneliness of a bruise that refused to fade. One afternoon, as Owen played in the backyard, he overheard two police officers talking near Mr. Atkins's house. Unaware of Owen crouched behind the fence, one officer muttered, "Something about this case is off." The other officer shrugged. "Maybe so, but the DA thinks there's enough for a conviction. Fingerprints alone." Still, the first one interrupted in a hushed tone, "I keep remembering the other break-ins. Same neighborhood, same method, no arrests." What if Owen didn't hear the rest? His mind was already racing as he tore inside to tell his mother. Catherine, however, was too worn out to listen. "Not now, honey," she sighed, rubbing her temples. "I can't handle this right now." Feeling small and powerless, Owen nonetheless began to form a plan under the covers that night, hugging his dinosaur close. He wasn't an expert on laws or investigations, but he believed in his dad's innocence. If no one else could prove it, then he would just have to do it himself. Over the following weeks, Owen embarked on a series of secret, courageous tasks. He paid close attention to the hushed talks of adults, jotting down small clues in his diary. He asked seemingly harmless questions that were anything but. He even sneaked into his father's lawyer's office under the pretense of looking for the restroom and glimpsed crucial parts of the case files spread on a desk. One fact especially leaped out. Mr. Atkins had lately argued with another neighbor, a grouchy widower named Mr. Shaw, over money. Owen recalled seeing Mr. Shaw prowling around late at night, fueling suspicion. Could he be involved? But how was Owen supposed to prove it, when grown-ups barely listened to him? The answer came unexpectedly on a night Catherine worked late. Owen was flipping through TV channels when he landed on a courtroom drama. Wide-eyed, he watched a young witness testify, speaking the truth even when it was terrifying. Gasps from the fictional court followed, and the show's lawyer reminded the jury that sometimes the smallest voices echo the loudest. Owen clung to his dinosaur with renewed determination. Maybe he could do exactly that. When David's trial opened, Owen begged to attend. Catherine hesitated, reluctant to expose him to the painful proceedings, but he insisted. "Please, Mom," he urged, "I need to be there." Reluctantly, she agreed. So, Owen sat at the back of the courtroom, his dinosaur clutched in his arms, silently watching. The trial marched forward grimly. The prosecutor painted David as a desperate man with a motive to harm Mr. Atkins. Witness after witness piled on, and Owen's hope threatened to falter. Then, on the third day, an extraordinary moment arrived. During a recess, Owen eavesdropped on the prosecutor, who was on the phone. The prosecutor complained about a missing piece of evidence, a damaged security camera from the night of the attack. At once, Owen remembered. He'd seen Mr. Shaw fiddling with tools near that camera just days before the crime. He recalled mentioning it to his mother, who dismissed it as unimportant. Now it felt huge. Summoning courage, Owen tugged on the sleeve of his father's lawyer, Mr. Bennett, and whispered, "I know something." Mr. Bennett hesitated, glancing at Catherine, who looked perplexed but nodded. Thus, a trembling, resolute Owen found himself summoned to the witness stand. Hugging his dinosaur, he recounted what he'd observed. The courtroom broke into bedlam. The judge demanded order. Even in the chaos, Owen stayed calm, his eyes locked on Mr. Shaw, who was seated in the audience. For the first time, Mr. Shaw looked truly unsettled, sweat gathering on his brow. And just as the judge calmed the uproar, Owen voiced the statement that stilled every heartbeat in the room. "I know where to look," he said. "If you don't believe me, I can tell you where you'll find proof." The room pulsed with tension. Yet whatever Owen was about to add would wait. This chapter was only beginning. The spectators murmured among themselves, piecing together Owen's cryptic remarks. The judge leaned forward, curiosity and caution warping his features. "Mr. O'Connor," he said, addressing Owen formally, "these are serious accusations. Can you clarify what you mean?" Owen hesitated, hands twisting around his dinosaur's tail. Mr. Bennett, his father's attorney, gave him a reassuring nod. Catherine watched from the gallery, awestruck yet fearful. Owen drew a deep breath. "I saw Mr. Shaw near Mr. Atkins's house," he explained. "He was working on that camera right before it got busted. I think he did it." A hush seized the court. Everyone gawked at Mr. Shaw, hunched in the back row. His face flamed under the scrutiny. "Objection!" The prosecutor, Mr. Ashton, exclaimed, jumping to his feet. "Your Honor, this is speculative at best. He's just a child, and these are unsubstantiated claims." Judge Parsons silenced him with a raised palm. "Sit down, Mr. Ashton. I'll determine what is and isn't credible here." He turned to Owen, a gentler expression on his face. "Owen, do you have more information? Anything that might help us understand your accusation?" Owen nodded slowly. "Yes. I wrote everything in my diary. And I overheard Mr. Shaw threaten Mr. Atkins right before the camera broke. He said, 'You'll regret messing with me.'" Audible gasps rippled across the pews. Mr. Shaw's face went scarlet. He opened his mouth to retort, but no words emerged. "Order!" The judge boomed, striking his gavel sharply. Mr. Shaw remained silent until called to testify. Owen's stomach churned. He had voiced what he must, yet fear of being disbelieved gnawed at him. "Owen," said Mr. Bennet kindly, stepping forward, "you mentioned you recorded your observations in a diary. Do you have that with you?" Owen nodded and fished out a worn blue notebook from his small backpack, handing it over. Mr. Bennet's eyes widened, scanning the scribbled entries. Then he turned to the judge. "Your Honor, we request a recess so we can analyze these notes and follow this lead." Mr. Ashton sprang up again. "This is absurd. We're letting an 8-year-old derail the entire trial?" Judge Parsons scowled at the prosecutor. "Sit down, Mr. Ashton. The court will recess for 2 hours while we examine this new evidence." The gavel's echo rang as reporters burst into clamor, audience members fidgeted, and Mr. Shaw stood off to one side, visibly perspiring. Outside in the corridor, Owen perched on a bench beside Catherine while Mr. Bennet and investigators pored over his diary. Catherine embraced her son, tears sliding down her cheeks. "Owen," she whispered, "why didn't you tell me any of this?" "You were always so exhausted," Owen replied softly, "and I wasn't sure it mattered. But after seeing Dad in court, I had to speak up." Catherine pressed a kiss to Owen's temple, pride and guilt intertwining in her voice. "You're so brave, sweetheart." Nearby, Mr. Shaw argued vehemently with his lawyer, flailing his arms and glaring at the onlookers. Owen's stomach twisted, and he tugged at his mom's sleeve. "Mom? Do you think he's scared?" Catherine's gaze fell on the angry older man. "He ought to be," she said. As minutes turned to agonizing hours, Mr. Bennet finally approached, his face grave. "Owen, your notes were quite valuable," he announced. "The investigators discovered something important about that camera. It wasn't just broken, it was tampered with. And there were fingerprints. They appear to match Mr. Shaw's." Catherine's eyes flashed wide. "Does that mean David can go free?" "Not immediately," Mr. Bennet cautioned gently. "This is significant, but we still need to prove Mr. Shaw was responsible for what happened to Mr. Atkins. We'll subpoena his financial records, see if there's any link." Owen's shoulders drooped. He'd hoped the revelation alone would free his father. "Hang in there," Mr. Bennet said. "You've already accomplished something big. It'll just take a bit more work." When proceedings resumed, tension in the air nearly crackled. Mr. Shaw's attorney tried to dismiss Owen's testimony as hearsay, but Judge Parsons overruled. The prosecutor renewed focus on the initial evidence against David, highlighting his fingerprints and wallet at the crime scene, until Mr. Bennet's cross-examination of the lead detective introduced a new thread of doubt. "Detective," Mr. Bennet began, pacing before the jury, "you testified that David O'Connor's wallet was found near the victim's residence, correct?" "Yes," confirmed the detective. "Was the wallet ever tested for prints?" Mr. Bennet asked. A slight frown. "Yes, and they matched Mr. O'Connor. Any indication the wallet was wiped or otherwise touched by someone else?" A hesitation. "There were smudges, but we couldn't determine anything conclusive." Mr. Bennet narrowed his eyes. "So, it's conceivable that someone planted that wallet?" "Objection," Mr. Ashton interjected. The judge let Mr. Bennet continue, and the detective admitted, "It's possible." Owen's heart soared. It might not be a slam dunk, but it instilled enough uncertainty for the jury to question David's guilt. At day's end, Mr. Bennet approached the bench with a bold motion. "Your Honor," he said, "in light of the new discoveries and Mr. Shaw's possible role, I move that he be brought to testify." The courtroom exploded in murmurs. Owen watched Mr. Shaw pale under the flickering lights. Judge Parsons rapped his gavel. "Court is adjourned. Mr. Shaw is hereby ordered to testify tomorrow." Outside, Owen felt a spark of hope but sensed the struggle wasn't over. Judging by the stormy look on Mr. Shaw's face as he exited, matters were about to intensify. The next morning, the courthouse thrummed with spectators, news of Owen's testimony having spread rapidly. Cameras fired on the steps outside, reporters shouting questions. Within those walls, a hush fell. Owen sat squeezed between Catherine and Mr. Bennet, clutching his dinosaur with clammy hands. "Do you think he'll come clean?" Owen whispered to his mother. Catherine tried a reassuring smile. "We'll see, sweetheart." Judge Parsons stepped in, restoring order. Mr. Shaw slumped in the witness box, no longer the confident, grouchy figure they all remembered. His lawyer perched stiffly at the defense table, rifling through a stack of documents. "Mr. Shaw," Judge Parsons began, voice stern, "you've been summoned to provide testimony regarding the assault on Mr. Atkins. Do you understand?" Mr. Shaw's eyes flickered around the courtroom. "Yes, Your Honor." The prosecutor began with standard questions. Did Mr. Shaw and Mr. Atkins know each other? Shaw claimed they'd been neighbors for years but didn't socialize. Then Mr. Bennett rose for cross-examination. "Mr. Shaw," he said, strolling before the jury, "you were observed arguing with Mr. Atkins shortly before the incident, correct?" Mr. Shaw's face reddened. "I don't recall any argument." Owen's pulse hammered. Mr. Shaw was blatantly lying. He resembled a cornered creature seeking any escape route. "Witnesses heard you say, 'You'll regret messing with me,'" Mr. Bennett pressed, voice calm yet relentlessly firm. "Do you deny that?" Shaw squirmed. "Maybe I said something like that, but not in a serious way." "Oh." Mr. Bennett lifted a brow. "And how do you explain being spotted near the security camera, later discovered tampered with, on the very night of the attack?" Shaw's voice rose, panicked. "I wasn't tampering with it. I was fixing it." The judge pounded his gavel for order when the crowd started buzzing. "Fixing it?" Mr. Bennett repeated, feigning curiosity. "Are you in the habit of repairing neighbors' surveillance cameras?" Shaw opened his mouth, then shut it, going pale. Mr. Bennett took another step closer. "Care to explain how your prints ended up on that camera, Mr. Shaw?" A heavy silence engulfed the room. Shaw's knuckles whitened on the witness box railing. I have no idea. Maybe I touched it in passing." "Convenient," Mr. Bennett said, turning to the judge. "Your Honor, I'd like to submit further evidence." Investigators discovered inconsistencies in Mr. Shaw's bank accounts, including a substantial cash withdrawal just before the attack. "Money we suspect is tied to a dispute with Mr. Atkins." Shaw's lawyer jumped up. "Objection. Pure speculation." "Overruled," Judge Parsons declared. "Mr. Shaw, answer the question." Beads of sweat dotted Shaw's temple. He stammered, It wasn't like that." "Then what was it like?" Mr. Bennett demanded. "It appears you possessed motive, opportunity, and a means to harm Mr. Atkins." Shaw clutched the railing, drawing shallow breaths. "You don't understand." "Then enlighten us," Mr. Bennett pressed. "Did you or did you not enter Mr. Atkins's home on the night he was assaulted?" Shaw's mouth quivered, but no sound came out. The judge leaned forward, repeating, "Answer the question, Mr. Shaw." In the audience, Owen's nails bit into his dinosaur's plush form, heart-pounding. Finally, Shaw managed a barely audible mumble. "Speak up," Judge Parsons urged. "I didn't mean to hurt him." Shaw suddenly bellowed, voice cracking. The room erupted in shouts as the judge frantically banged his gavel. "Order!" Mr. Bennett's eyes blazed. "Mr. Shaw, are you confessing?" Shaw slumped, burying his head in his hands. "He owed me money," he mumbled. "We fought. I only wanted to scare him, but it got out of hand." A shockwave rippled through the attendees. Catherine pressed her hands to her mouth, tears streaking her cheeks. Mr. Bennett glanced at Owen with a nod of gratitude. The judge announced a recess, and onlookers flooded out in a tide of confusion. Owen sank into his seat, grasping his dinosaur, scarcely believing Mr. Shaw had confessed. His father was blameless after all. Yet as the courtroom emptied, Owen spotted something peculiar, Shaw's lawyer whispering urgently with Mr. Ashton, the prosecutor. They parted abruptly, Mr. Ashton storming out, face tense. "Mom?" Owen asked, gently tugging Catherine's sleeve. "Why did he run off like that?" Catherine followed Owen's line of sight. "I'm not sure, sweetheart. Maybe nothing." But dread swelled in Owen's stomach. Nothing about this trial felt simple. That evening, mother and son waited in a courthouse lounge when Mr. Bennett entered, his expression troubled. "There's been a development," he announced, settling next to them. "What kind of development?" Catherine's voice trembled with unease. "After Shaw's confession, the police searched his house again," Mr. Bennett explained. "They found signs suggesting he wasn't acting alone. Owen's eyes widened. What do you mean? Mr. Bennett measured his words. Traces of another person's DNA on items in Shaw's home. The police suspect an accomplice. Catherine gasped. Who? We don't know yet, he admitted, but it means your husband's case isn't closed. Not until they determine who else might be involved. Owen's spirits plummeted. He had believed the nightmare ended once Mr. Shaw confessed, but now it seemed more secrets lay ahead. He gazed out the darkening window, weighed down by the sense that the worst was still lurking. The next morning, Owen and Catherine returned to the courthouse, burdened by the revelation that an accomplice was in play. David's trial persisted, and his fate hung in the balance. Owen felt his family's stress more keenly than ever and refused to stand by helplessly. When court convened, Mr. Shaw remained in custody, though his lawyer continued representing him. Judge Parsons gavelled the proceedings to order, and Mr. Bennett rose to address the court. Your Honor, he began, while Mr. Shaw's confession has illuminated certain facts, the suggestion of an accomplice raises new concerns. We request a temporary delay so the defense and law enforcement can investigate these leads. Mr. Ashton, the prosecutor, leapt up. Your Honor, this is a ploy to buy time. The evidence against David O'Connor is still solid. Shaw's confession doesn't absolve him. Judge Parsons raised a hand, silencing the bickering. The defense has made a credible argument. I'll allow a recess, but the trial will resume as soon as new evidence surfaces. Court is adjourned. The gavel came down sharply, and people filed out. Owen tugged on Mr. Bennett's coat. So, now what? Mr. Bennett offered a kind smile. We wait, Owen. Officers are combing Shaw's home for more clues about this accomplice. If they find something, it might change everything. Waiting felt intolerable to Owen, who longed to jump into action. That evening, safe at home, he sat at the kitchen table, flipping through his diary. Catherine was in the living room, murmuring anxiously on the phone with David, still locked away. Owen's thoughts returned to Mr. Shaw, who had appeared agitated and haunted, as if carrying an even darker secret. Why would a man as stubborn as Shaw need someone else's help? Suddenly, there was a knock at the front door. Catherine, looking tense, instructed Owen to remain put. He watched her open the door to a police officer bearing a small evidence bag. Mrs. O'Connor, the officer said in a subdued tone, I have some questions regarding this. He held up the bag. Inside glimmered a silver locket, the chain snapped and surface scratched. Catherine frowned. I've never seen that. Why are you showing it to us? The officer's eyes flicked to Owen. It was discovered in Mr. Shaw's home, and it has Owen's fingerprints on it. Shock rolled through the room. Catherine's mouth fell open, and Owen felt the air vanish from his lungs. That's impossible, Catherine stuttered. Owen has never set foot in that house. I understand this is unsettling, the officer responded. But we have to figure out how this occurred. May I speak with Owen? Catherine slowly nodded, and Owen stepped forward, pulse pounding. I don't know how my prints got on it, he confessed. I've never seen that locket. Kneeling, the officer lowered his voice. Try hard to remember, son. Did you ever handle a locket like this? Maybe someone handed it to you, or you picked it up somewhere. Owen squinted at the tarnished jewelry. Then, like lightning, the realization struck. I did see this before, he breathed. It was on Mr. Atkins's porch the morning after he was attacked. I thought it belonged to him. I picked it up for a moment, but my mom called me and I dropped it. I forgot all about it. The officer and Catherine exchanged a glance. That's very important, son, the officer said. Thank you for telling us. We'll keep looking into this. Once the officer departed, Catherine drew Owen close. You did the right thing, sweetheart, she said quietly. But it keeps getting more complicated. The next morning, Owen woke to see 2 patrol cars outside. Catherine explained they were gathering an updated statement from Mr. Atkins, who'd finally regained enough strength to speak. A surge of hope fluttered in Owen's chest. Maybe Mr. Atkins could fill in the blanks. But by the time the officers returned, their grim faces dashed his optimism. He doesn't remember much, one officer told Catherine. He recalled voices, but nothing concrete, just the sound of a scuffle and something breaking. That's it? Owen felt disappointment weigh him down. He had pinned his hopes on Mr. Atkins's account. But then the officer consulted his notepad. He did mention something else. One of the voices sounded oddly familiar, like someone he'd spoken to in the past. We're cross-referencing records to figure out who it might be. Owen's thoughts whirled. Another person Mr. Atkins recognized? It had to be someone from the neighborhood, or perhaps someone from his past. That night, Owen lay awake, gazing at the ceiling as he wrestled with possible suspects. What if the accomplice wasn't an outsider at all, but someone dangerously close? He barely slept, haunted by the notion that the perpetrator might be a friend or relative. The next morning, Catherine discovered him already up and dressed, sitting stiffly on his bed. "Owen," she asked softly, "you all right?" "We have to figure out who the accomplice is," he answered solemnly. "Dad can't wait forever." Catherine sighed, kneeling so they were eye to eye. "Honey, this is for the police to handle." "But what if they overlook something?" Owen insisted. "What if there's a clue only I can see?" Reluctantly, Catherine relented. "We'll take it one step at a time, okay? You've done so much already." Still feeling the weight of responsibility, Owen dedicated the day to scouring every recollection of that fateful night. He settled on the living room sofa with his diary, meticulously listing details about Mr. Shaw, Mr. Atkins, and events leading up to the attack. His focus returned repeatedly to Mr. Atkins's recognized voice. It wasn't new or random. It belonged to someone he already knew well enough to argue with or plan something with. Mr. Shaw was the prime suspect, but he was in custody. Then, like a puzzle piece locking into place, an idea struck Owen. What if it's someone who worked with Mr. Atkins? He murmured aloud. Somebody he trusted? His pulse thumped. Contractors, service workers, old acquaintances. There were so many possibilities. But Owen wasn't ready to give up. He decided to glean more clues from the neighborhood. That afternoon, Owen persuaded Catherine to let him visit the local park. She was reluctant, but he looked so restless that she finally agreed as long as he stayed in sight. While Catherine read on a bench, Owen strolled toward the park's far edge, where Mr. Atkins's house loomed beyond a cluster of trees. He stood there, scanning the house, trying to spark a fresh insight. "Hello, Owen," a voice startled him. He turned to see Mrs. Taylor, a kindly neighbor carrying a grocery bag. She smiled. "I haven't seen you playing much lately. How are you doing?" Owen forced a polite grin. "I'm okay." Mrs. Taylor's face softened with concern. "I heard about what happened in court yesterday. I just wanted you to know that was brave, standing up there." "Thanks," Owen said, then he gathered courage. "Mrs. Taylor, did Mr. Atkins mention any visitors before he got hurt? Someone suspicious?" She furrowed her brow. "Well, he told me someone kept coming to his door, demanding money. He seemed anxious, but I don't recall a name. I think it was an old coworker." Owen's heart fluttered. "Thank you," he blurted, racing back to Catherine, mind churning over the idea that Mr. Atkins's old coworker might have joined forces with Mr. Shaw. That night, Owen relayed this discovery to Mr. Bennett and his mom. "So maybe it's somebody from Mr. Atkins's previous job," he concluded. "Someone he didn't trust." Mr. Bennett nodded thoughtfully. "That's an excellent lead, Owen. I'll pass the info to the police." "But what if they find nothing?" Owen asked, chewing his lip. "What if it gets missed?" "They won't," Mr. Bennett reassured him gently. "You've already brought them so much, just keep that bravery up." Still, Owen felt uneasy as though a bigger, darker twist loomed. Early the next morning, Owen was jolted awake by Catherine's phone ringing. Through the wall, he heard her drowsy greeting morph into sharp alarm. "Are you sure?" she asked, voice rising. "We'll be right there." Moments later, she burst into Owen's room, face pale. "Owen, get dressed. We have to go to the station. They found something big." At the station, Detective James and Mr. Bennett were waiting in a cramped office. Detective James held a small stack of papers. "We uncovered new leads," he declared. "Bank records from Mr. Atkins reveal repeated payments to a man named Frank Mitchell, an ex-con who once worked with Mr. Atkins at a construction company. Mr. Shaw's phone logs show multiple calls with Mitchell in the days before the assault." Owen's stomach sank. "So, Frank Mitchell is the accomplice?" "That's what we suspect," Detective James said. "We've issued a warrant for his arrest." But just as he finished, another officer burst in, looking frantic. "Sir, we have a problem. Mitchell's gone. He emptied his apartment last night." A chill shot up Owen's spine. Frank Mitchell was on the run, and he knew the authorities were close. Who knew what lengths he might go to? Silence seized the room, and Owen clutched Catherine's hand. The puzzle pieces were aligning, but danger spiked. Mitchell was out there, somewhere, and Owen feared he wouldn't surrender without a fight. The police station felt oppressively heavy. Detective James briefed them on the situation. Frank Mitchell had vanished. Owen's hold on his mother's hand tightened, dread surging at the notion of a dangerous fugitive. "Do you think he'll come here?" Owen asked, voice trembling. Detective James shook his head slowly. "Unlikely. When people like Mitchell realize they're wanted, they tend to go underground. Still, we'll do everything possible to keep your family safe." "Safe?" Catherine echoed, her voice breaking. "My husband's still behind bars, our name is all over the news, and now there's a fugitive tied to this. How is any of that safe?" Detective James raised a calming hand. "I understand, Mrs. O'Connor. We're doing everything we can to bring Mitchell, Indiana." Catherine nodded numbly, her eyes blazing with fear. Owen glanced up at her clenched fists, realizing she was struggling to keep it together. "It'll be okay, Mom," he whispered, though he felt far from sure. She tried to smile. "You're braver than I'll ever be, Owen." That night, sleep eluded Owen. He kept seeing Mitchell's face in his mind, though in truth he had no idea what Mitchell looked like. Where was this man? What was he planning? Questions whirled like a carousel spinning too fast. Finally, Owen sat up, switching on a small lamp. If he couldn't rest, he might as well work. Grabbing his diary, he jotted everything he knew about Mitchell, his link to Mr. Atkins, his calls to Mr. Shaw, suspicious money. Then Owen paused, a dark possibility creeping in. What if Mitchell returns to finish what he started? The thought chilled him, but ironically gave him resolve. If Mitchell was still out there, that meant more secrets were waiting to be unraveled. And if Owen excelled at anything lately, it was ferreting out the truth. By morning, nerves spread through the O'Connor household. Catherine triple-checked the locks, flinching each time the phone rang. Both knew the cops were on high alert, but the uncertainty eroded their composure. Around noon, breaking news: Frank Mitchell's car had been discovered abandoned along a remote highway. Inside were a burner phone, a wad of cash, and a scrap of paper listing several addresses, including the O'Connors' home. When Detective James called to inform Catherine, her face turned white as chalk. "What does that mean?" she asked, voice trembling. "It suggests he's done his homework," Detective James said grimly. "He may have been scouting hideouts or targets. We've increased patrols in your area, and officers will be stationed outside your house at all times." "Thank you," Catherine whispered, ending the call. She dropped onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. "Owen," she murmured, "are we in danger?" Owen's insides twisted. Maybe, but the police are here." Despite her attempt to compose herself, Catherine looked terrified. "He's not just running away," she said hollowly. "He's planning something." Owen shared that dread. The presence of their address in Mitchell's notes felt like a direct threat. That evening, the tension became suffocating. Catherine distracted herself by scrubbing surfaces that were already spotless, while Owen hovered at the kitchen table, diary open, mind churning in circles. Suddenly the phone rang, making them both jump. Catherine hesitated, then lifted the receiver. "Hello." Owen watched her face blanch to white. "Who is this?" she demanded shakily. "What do you want?" A faintly muffled voice answered. Owen couldn't distinguish the words. Catherine's knuckles whitened on the phone. "If you come near my family, I swear." Her voice cracked and she slammed it down. For a second, she merely stared at the silent phone, trembling all over. "Mom?" Owen ventured in a small voice. "Who was it?" She couldn't speak at first. Finally, she turned, eyes brimming with terror. "It was Frank Mitchell," she whispered. "He said he's watching." The hours afterward played out like a bad dream. Catherine alerted the police, who swarmed the house within minutes. They swept every room, organizing watch shifts outside. From his bedroom window, Owen saw flashlights crisscross the yard while officers murmured instructions. Detective James arrived soon after, pulling Catherine aside for a private word. Although Owen couldn't make out the conversation, his mother's face told him all he needed to know. They were both petrified. As the night dragged on, Owen lay rigid in bed, the possibility of Mitchell lurking nearby gnawing at him. If Mitchell was bold enough to threaten them, what if he really did come back? The answer was delivered just before daybreak. Owen was jolted awake by the sound of shattering glass. Heart in his throat, he bolted upright, clutching his dinosaur. Footsteps thundered through the house, followed by urgent shouts and a scuffle. "Mom!" Owen shouted, springing from his bed. He flung open his bedroom door to find two officers wrestling a hooded figure to the ground in the hallway. Despite the obscured face, Owen knew it was Frank Mitchell. He had actually broken into their home. "Get back, hon!" Catherine cried, pulling him against her as more officers piled in. Mitchell fought with savage force, but the police soon overpowered him, clamping cuffs on his wrists and dragging him out of the house. As he was hauled through the doorway, he glared over his shoulder, meeting Owen's gaze with an icy hatred that made Owen's blood run cold. "It's not over," Mitchell hissed, malice dripping from every syllable. "This isn't finished." Owen clung to Catherine, his heart hammering. Though Mitchell was caught, his words echoed ominously. Something told Owen there were still secrets hidden. Chaos gripped the house after Mitchell's arrest. Officers dusted for prints, photographed the shattered window, and took statements from Catherine and Owen. Yet amid the upheaval, a collective sigh of relief loomed. Mitchell was no longer on the run. His final, venomous threat, however, haunted Owen. "It isn't over." Sitting on the couch, Owen watched Detective James approach carrying a file folder. He looked grave but tempered with empathy. "Owen," he said softly, "may I have a word?" Catherine stepped up protectively. "He's had a terrible shock, Detective. Don't push him too hard." Detective James crouched to Owen's level. "I realize tonight was scary, but you should be proud. Thanks to you, Mitchell's off the streets and can't hurt anyone else." Owen clutched his dinosaur's tail. "But he said it's not over. What if he has more plans?" James and Catherine exchanged a glance. "We'll dig into everything he's done, everything he's said," James reassured. "He's desperate. And desperate people make mistakes. That's how we'll ensure he stays behind bars." Catherine placed a hand on Owen's shoulder. "You see, sweetheart? The police will handle this." Owen nodded, although anxiety still gnawed at him. A voice inside whispered that a vital piece was still missing. The next morning, Owen found himself again at the kitchen table, diary open, riffling through every clue. Something about Mitchell's break-in bugged him. He didn't try to harm them. He rummaged around, more like he was searching for something. "Mom," Owen ventured as Catherine poured coffee. "Do you think Mitchell came to find something?" She arched a brow. "Find something? He broke in but didn't actually hurt anyone," Owen reasoned. "What if he was hunting for proof or documents?" Catherine sank into the chair across from him, adopting a thoughtful frown. "It's possible. But what? And why? Could it relate to Mr. Atkins?" Owen asked, scribbling in his diary. Catherine tapped a finger on the tabletop. "I'll mention it to Detective James. Maybe there's evidence Mitchell feared was hidden here." That afternoon, they met with Detective James. Upon hearing Owen's theory, the detective rubbed his chin. "Interesting. Mitchell may have been attempting to destroy evidence or retrieve something Atkins gave the O'Connors inadvertently. We'll keep investigating." "What about Mr. Atkins?" Owen pressed. "Does he have any new recollections?" James shook his head. "He's still disoriented, but he did confirm one suspicion. Mitchell was stealing from him at their old construction job. Atkins planned to expose him once he had proof. That might be why Mitchell attacked him." Owen swallowed hard. "So Mitchell thought Atkins had evidence that could ruin him." "Exactly," James said grimly. "And there's more. We discovered a notebook on Mitchell when he was caught. A list of names, including yours, Owen." A chill bristled across Owen's skin. "My name? Why would he list me?" "We're unsure," James admitted. "But the others are also connected to Atkins. He may have been eliminating loose ends." Catherine's face drained of color. So it wasn't just us? James shook his head. Seems not. But we're contacting everyone involved, ensuring they're safe. Owen stared at his diary, heart pounding. With Mitchell's arrest, he'd expected closure, yet now they faced an even broader mystery. Layers on layers. That evening, Owen lay awake, the day's events looping in his mind. He grabbed his diary again, scanning each note. Why had Mitchell specifically demanded hush money from Atkins? Why was Owen's name in his notebook? Suddenly he recalled the security camera footage, the hidden safe, any clue left unexplored? Then he remembered Mr. Atkins's house as the epicenter. The assault, the camera tampering, everything swirling around that property. What if something crucial is stashed there? Mitchell could have been after it the entire time. Bolting upright, Owen hurried to Catherine's room. "Mom, I think we should ask the police to check Mr. Atkins's place again," he declared. She blinked, rubbing her eyes. "Owen, it's late. The police have probably already done a thorough search. But what if they missed something? Mitchell must have been looking for something crucial, like you said earlier." Catherine studied him. Finally, she sighed. "I'll call Detective James in the morning and see if they can investigate more thoroughly. But you're not going anywhere near there, understood?" Relief flooded Owen. Sure enough, the next morning Detective James phoned with an update. "We followed your hunch and re-examined Mr. Atkins's property," he told Owen. "You were right. There was something buried in his backyard." Owen's pulse raced. "What did you find?" "A locked safe," James revealed. "Hidden under piles of old building supplies. We haven't opened it yet, but it might hold the answers we need." Catherine laid a hand on Owen's shoulder, eyes shining with cautious hope. "Owen, you've done plenty. The police can handle the rest." But Owen's curiosity burned unrelentingly. He was certain whatever lay inside that safe would be explosive. As dusk settled, he couldn't stop wondering, what if this safe unraveled everything they still didn't know? Word of the safe's discovery circulated like lightning through the neighborhood. Reporters swarmed the station, grasping for details. Owen and Catherine sat at home, a knot of nerves binding them as they awaited news. Finally, the phone rang, and Catherine answered with trembling fingers. "Detective James?" Her expression shifted from shock to disbelief. "Are you sure?" She paused, absorbing his reply. "Thank you." She turned to Owen. They opened the safe. There was a ton of money inside, thousands of dollars. And she paused, her voice quivering. "They found a gun." Owen's eyes widened. "Is it the one Mitchell used on Mr. Atkins?" "They're testing it. But the strangest part is Mitchell's prints aren't on it. Someone else's are." Owen felt dread coil in his gut. "Who?" "They don't know yet," Catherine replied. "Detective James thinks it suggests a third person we haven't identified, someone Mitchell never mentioned." Owen's mind reeled. Another suspect? He pictured Mitchell's menacing stare, his desperate attempts to reclaim something. If the safe and gun belonged to an unknown party, the situation was more twisted than ever. Later that day, Detective James arrived at their home with a stack of documents from the safe. He spread them across the kitchen table, looking thoroughly preoccupied. "This is what we know," he began. "The amount of cash matches the sum Mr. Atkins claimed was stolen from his construction company, money Mitchell likely took. But the gun complicates matters. The prints belong to a person named Robert Landon, who was also an employee there. Mr. Atkins fired him and Mitchell around the same time. We haven't located Landon since." Owen's thoughts sped frantically. "Do you think Landon attacked Mr. Atkins?" James grimaced. "Possibly. He has a violent history and a motive to silence Atkins. We just don't have firm proof yet." A chill threaded through Owen's spine. One by one, fresh players emerged, Mitchell, Shaw, now Landon, and each revelation only magnified the complexity. That night, Owen lay in bed, wide awake and grappling with a swirl of uncertainties. Each new puzzle piece, Shaw's confession, Mitchell's threats, the safe full of money, a gun with Landon's prints, seemed to bring them closer, but also introduced new confusion. He thumbed through his diary absently until a latent memory floated up. The day he spotted Mr. Shaw tampering with the security camera, he wasn't alone. Another man stood beside him, broad-shouldered, sporting a noticeable scar on his cheek. Owen had assumed he was just some neighbor or handyman, but now he realized it could have been Robert Landon. The realization snapped Owen upright. He rushed to Catherine's bedroom, diary in hand, rousing her. "Mom, I remember something." She rubbed her eyes. "Owen, it's the middle of the night. I think I saw Robert Landon that day I saw Mr. Shaw," Owen blurted. "He had a scar on his cheek. I just never thought it mattered until now." Catherine sat bolt upright. "Are you sure?" "Yes." He recounted everything. Without wasting time, Catherine dialed Detective James, relaying Owen's new memory. James's voice, though groggy, brimmed with tension. "That's critical," he said. "If Landon was there with Shaw, it confirms his involvement. We'll intensify the search." By daybreak, the neighborhood hummed with police activity. Door-to-door visits, suspect descriptions, and constant radio chatter about Robert Landon. Watching it all from his window, Owen felt pride stir. His memory had sparked a valuable clue. But as hours ticked by, no sign of Landon emerged. He seemed to have disappeared. Dusk fell, and the O'Connors were back in the house on tenterhooks. Catherine paced, phone in hand, awaiting any word from the police. Suddenly, there was a knock. Catherine opened the door to reveal a somber Detective James. "We found Landon," he announced. Her breath caught. "Where?" "At an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. He's barricaded himself inside." Owen's heart lurched. "So, he's not coming out?" James sighed. "He knows we're on to him, so he's refusing to surrender. Worse, he demands to speak with someone linked to the case. Says he has information that can set things straight, but won't talk to us or come out otherwise." Catherine frowned. "Who does he want to talk to?" James hesitated, glancing at Owen. "He asked for you, Owen." Owen's stomach gave a terrifying flip. "Why me?" "Individuals like Landon sometimes fixate on someone they view as pivotal," Detective James explained gently. "But we'd never consider letting you go in. It's too dangerous. I'm just keeping you informed." As James left, Owen's mind churned. Landon might possess the final piece to clear David's name. Yet the idea of meeting him was petrifying. The house fell silent, tension so thick it was almost tangible. Catherine triple-locked everything, insisting Owen sleep in her room, a policeman posted by the door. Owen lay awake, fixated on Landon's request. What if he truly held the key to freeing Dad? Was it worth risking his safety? Eventually he whispered, "Mom," into the dark. She stirred. "Yes, Owen?" "What if Landon can save Dad? What if I'm the only one he'll tell?" Catherine groaned softly. "Oh, he's a dangerous man. We can't just trust him. But if I don't talk to him, maybe Dad stays in jail. Landon could clam up forever." With a weary sigh, Catherine said, "I understand, but please, let the police handle it." Owen stayed silent. He knew she wanted to protect him, but a persistent voice insisted he had to act. Early next morning, squads surrounded the old warehouse where Landon was holed up. Negotiators spent hours pleading with him over a PA system, but he refused all contact. "I'll only talk to the kid," he bellowed from within. "Bring him here, or you get nothing." In a mobile command center, Detective James paced. "This is a stalemate," he grumbled. "He won't budge." Catherine, looking drained, stood nearby. "Surely you aren't considering giving him what he wants?" James shook his head. "Absolutely not. It's far too risky. But if we keep waiting, this might escalate." Huddled in the corner, Owen listened. Dread twisted his stomach, yet a strange resolve began building. Taking a deep breath, he stepped forward. "I'll talk to him." Both Catherine and Detective James spun around in shock. "No," Catherine said firmly. "You're not going near him." "It's my dad's life," Owen said, voice wavering yet determined. "If Landon can help clear him, I have to at least try." Detective James knelt. "Owen, I admire your courage, but this is extremely dangerous. Landon's unpredictable. I can't guarantee you'll be safe." "Couldn't you guard me?" Owen asked. "You'd never let him lay a finger on me." James rubbed his neck, exchanging a tortured look with Catherine. "It's still a monumental risk." "Please," Owen pleaded, tears forming. Dad needs me. Catherine bent to Owen's level, clasping his hands. Sweetheart, we can't just. I'm already in danger, Owen whispered. Landon knows my name, our home, everything. He won't quit until he's been heard. Catherine closed her eyes, exhaling. Finally, she looked at Detective James for direction. He let out a reluctant breath. All right, but only under strict conditions. You'll remain somewhere safe, with officers everywhere, while we open a line of communication to Landon. He won't be allowed within arm's reach. Catherine, eyes flooding with tears, nodded grimly. But if anything seems off. James nodded. We'll pull the plug immediately. An hour later, Owen found himself in a small, tech-equipped room inside the mobile command post. Police clustered around, cameras ready, and Detective James hovered protectively. Owen wore a hidden mic outside. Landon paced behind barricaded doors, furious and restless. All right, James said softly. We'll patch you through. Just talk to him. Keep him on the line, and don't promise him anything we can't deliver. Heart hammering, Owen leaned toward the microphone. Hello. Landon's voice crackled through the speakers. So you're the kid? The one stirring everything up? Yes, Owen forced steadiness. I'm Owen O'Connor. A derisive chuckle from Landon. You've got guts, boy. I'll give you that. What do you want from me? Owen gulped. You demanded to speak to me. Why? I want the truth out, Landon snarled. People think I'm the culprit, but they're barking up the wrong tree. I'm not the real threat. Owen frowned. What do you mean? I didn't assault Atkins, Landon claimed. Sure, I was there that night, but I never harmed him. That was all Shaw. Owen looked to Detective James, who gestured encouragingly for him to keep Landon talking. But your prints were found on the gun, Owen stated. How do you explain that? After a brief silence, Landon said, because Shaw planted them to pin it on me if things went south. Why would he frame you? Owen pressed. Because Atkins had dirt on Shaw, Landon explained. Shaw didn't just steal from Atkins, he blackmailed him. Atkins was about to reveal everything. So Shaw panicked and decided to shut him up for good. Owen's pulse raced. Do you have proof? Yeah, Landon said bitterly. Shaw kept a ledger recording every shady deal. He forced me to help hide it. I'll tell you where if you promise to help me, so I'm not left to rot. Detective James nodded silently, so Owen continued. All right, I'll do what I can. But you have to tell me where this ledger is. Landon hesitated before speaking. It's buried behind that old office building on Main Street, under the big oak tree. Dig there, and you'll find everything. James signaled to the negotiators. We've got what we need, he whispered. Great job, Owen. As the negotiators took over, Owen slumped in his chair, heart thundering. If Landon was telling the truth, that ledger could blow the case wide open. But he knew Shaw wouldn't go down easily. There was still a fight ahead. Early the following morning, Detective James led a crew to the derelict office building off Main Street, boarded windows covered in graffiti. In its neglected backyard stood a gnarled oak, roots twisting through the dirt. Owen, seated in an unmarked car with Catherine some distance away, peered out the window, hugging his dinosaur. Catherine had refused to let him any closer. This is as far as you go, she declared. Let the police do their job. Owen nodded, adrenaline coursing through him. He watched officers plunge shovels into the soil at the base of the oak. Each scoop felt like an eon. Suddenly, one officer shouted, "We've got something." Owen pressed his face to the window. Detective James crouched near the hole and pulled out a rusted metal box. Carefully prying it open, he extracted a stack of papers. We need to analyze these, James said, holding the documents aloft. But it looks like it could be the ledger Landon described. Catherine exhaled a shaky sigh. Maybe this is it. Maybe David can finally come home. Yet a pang of anxiety still twisted in Owen's chest. Even with the ledger, they weren't quite safe. Back at the station, James and his team pored over every page while Owen and Catherine lingered in a side room. Hours dragged by until James emerged, looking both troubled and triumphant. It's all here, he said, spreading the ledger on a table. Missing funds, blackmail payments, plus references to other crimes involving Shaw and Landon. This is the big break we needed. Does this mean my dad can come home? Owen asked, voice laced with hope. James paused. We're close, but we need an airtight case against Shaw. He's slippery, always covering his tracks. Thankfully, this ledger is the smoking gun we've been missing. Catherine draped an arm around Owen. How long before David's charges are dropped? Not long, James assured. But first we have to bring Shaw in. A knot formed in Owen's stomach. Shaw had always seemed devious and cold, and now, with the ledger out, he might become cornered and more dangerous than ever. The next day, police arrested Shaw at his home. Rumors flew through the neighborhood, neighbors abuzz with shock. From the television, Owen observed the coverage, an odd mix of relief and lingering dread. Shaw's capture was a victory, but the endgame loomed, the trial. In the run-up, tension soared. Shaw's lawyer painted him as a scapegoat, insisting the ledger was doctored. Landon, who had brokered a deal for a lighter sentence if he testified, was vilified for his own wrongdoing. David, still in custody, awaited the day his innocence would be recognized. On the trial's first day, the court was jam-packed. Owen sat with Catherine and Mr. Bennett, David's lawyer, who attended to observe. Shaw entered in handcuffs, face emotionless, scanning the gallery. When he spotted Owen, the boy felt an icy jolt as Shaw's stare flitted over him. The prosecutor wasted no time submitting the ledger. Each entry was spelled out for the jury: embezzlement, blackmail, threats. Landon's testimony was equally damning, describing how Shaw had orchestrated the attack on Mr. Atkins. But Shaw stood his ground. His defense attacked Landon's credibility, claiming the ledger was falsified. With every back and forth, Owen's nerves stretched. Finally, the day concluded, and outside the courtroom, Owen confided in Mr. Bennett. What if they don't believe us? Mr. Bennett offered a gentle smile. The evidence is rock solid. It's just a matter of presenting it properly. Day after day, the trial wore on. Each session was grueling, with intense testimony and fierce debate. Owen listened carefully, piecing details together. He felt a flush of pride when Detective James took the stand, calmly explaining how the ledger had been authenticated. The biggest bombshell arrived when Mr. Atkins testified. Still unsteady from his injuries, he walked with a cane to the witness stand. Pale yet resolute, he recounted the harrowing night. Shaw came to my house in a rage, Atkins said. He told me I was going to ruin him, that I couldn't be trusted to keep quiet. I said I wasn't afraid. Then he pulled out a gun. The courtroom collectively inhaled. Owen's chest tightened. This was the moment they had been waiting for. What happened next? Asked the prosecutor. I fought back, Atkins recalled, voice trembling. But Shaw overpowered me. The last thing I remember was him shouting for me to keep my mouth shut. Then everything went dark. As Mr. Atkins stepped down, Owen spotted a crack in Shaw's carefully maintained mask. His jaw clenched, and his eyes darted around nervously. By week's end, the prosecution had piled up a mountain of evidence. The defense's attempts to puncture it couldn't overcome the damning ledger, testimonies, and Shaw's unsteady demeanor. The jury departed to deliberate. Owen, Catherine, and Mr. Bennett waited in the hall, time creeping unbearably. Eventually, the jury returned. The courtroom hushed as the foreperson stood with a slip of paper in hand. In the case of the state versus Michael Shaw, she declared, we find the defendant guilty on all counts. The chamber burst with cheers and murmurs. Owen felt tears streaming down as relief crashed over him. Shaw was convicted, and not long afterward, Detective James approached. With Shaw going down for this, I can file to have David's charges dismissed. Your family's going to get justice? Owen threw his arms around Catherine, euphoria swirling. Dad was coming home. Still, a quiet voice in his mind reminded him how much they had changed along the way. Lessons about courage, kindness, and speaking up against adversity would last forever. 2 weeks passed after Shaw's conviction, and the day Owen had hungered for arrived. David was finally cleared. Charges dropped, case closed. Yet the emotional scars lingered for all of them. Owen and Catherine waited anxiously in front of the courthouse, where David was being released. Owen clung to his dinosaur, heart thrumming with anticipation. Then the doors opened, and David emerged, relief and amazement on his face. "Daddy!" Owen cried, sprinting into his father's arms. David dropped his bag, scooping his son up. Tears shone in both their eyes. "Owen," David croaked, voice breaking, "my brave boy." Catherine joined them, hugging them both, tears of her own streaming. It felt like the world had paused in that joyful reunion. That night, the O'Connors finally shared a meal at home. Laughter and conversation filled the kitchen. David, trying to ease the mood, recalled silly jail anecdotes. "Turns out I'm terrible at chess," he said, making Owen giggle, "but I learned to bake bread. Maybe I'll give it a shot for us." "That would be great, honey," Catherine replied, smiling, truly smiling, for the first time in ages. "But maybe no more jail stories tonight, okay?" David laughed. "Deal." Then his tone grew serious as he faced Owen. "I can never thank you enough, son. You fought for me when nobody else would. You're the reason I'm here." Owen turned red, gaze dropping to his plate. "I just wanted to help. I knew you were innocent." "You did more than help," David murmured. "You changed our lives." Tears blurred Owen's vision. He wrapped his arms around his dad. "I missed you so much," he whispered. "I missed you too," David replied, pressing a gentle kiss to Owen's hair. "I promise I'll never let anything like this happen again." Although reunited, the weeks that followed were not without struggles. David wrestled with nightmares and the difficulty of resuming normal life. Catherine juggled her nursing job with providing emotional support to both her husband and son. Owen, relieved to have his dad safe, still recalled the trial's intensity. At school, some kids lauded him as a hero, while others whispered rumors about his family. Owen tried to focus on the good he'd achieved. One lunchtime, a boy named Ethan, who previously avoided Owen, came by looking sheepish. "Hey, Owen," he mumbled, kicking at the ground. "Could we talk?" Owen blinked. "Sure. What's up?" Ethan fidgeted. "Who wanted to say sorry. My parents told me not to go near you because they believed your dad was guilty. But it turns out he wasn't." A gentle warmth flooded Owen's chest. "Thanks, Ethan. That means a lot." Ethan looked down. "You're really brave, you know? Speaking out in court like that. I could never do it." Owen shrugged modestly. "I was scared, but Dad needed me. I had to." Ethan nodded, holding out his hand. "If you ever need anything, I'm here." "Friends?" Owen hesitated a second, then shook Ethan's hand. "Friends." A sense of peace rose within him. This ordeal had taught him the power of honesty, empathy, and the possibility of healing rifts that once seemed too wide. One evening, the O'Connors settled on their couch, watching a family movie. Afterward, David turned off the TV and said, "I've been thinking about all we've endured. We should help other families going through what we did." Catherine tilted her head. "Help them how?" "There are plenty of people who get caught up in the system," David explained. "They're innocent but have no one like Owen to stand up for them. Maybe we can start a foundation that focuses on kids who want to tell their side of the story." Owen's eyes brightened. "That's an amazing idea. We could help kids find their voices." David beamed. "Exactly. We can call it the Brave Voices Foundation. What do you think?" Catherine's eyes glistened with tears of pride. "It's perfect. We can turn this trauma into something good." Owen's heart swelled. He'd once considered himself just an ordinary boy, but now he understood how a single determined voice could change countless lives. In the ensuing months, the O'Connors dedicated themselves to launching the Brave Voices Foundation. They spoke at community centers, visited schools, and told their story, inspiring others to stand up for justice. Owen became a symbol of resilience, proof that a child's determination could illuminate even the darkest corners. Though the memories of their ordeal would never fully vanish, the O'Connors discovered something lasting. Their family was unbreakable. Together, they had confronted the unthinkable and emerged not just survivors but champions of compassion, truth, and courage. Yet as they rejoiced in this fresh purpose, a letter arrived in the mail, no return address. Inside was a lone sentence, written in neat, deliberate handwriting. "The truth isn't always what it seems." Owen stared at the line, heart pounding anew. Just when he thought their story had reached its conclusion, a new chapter threatened to begin. That cryptic message jolted the O'Connors back into uncertainty, stirring all their questions at once. Who sent it, and what did it mean? Catherine, ever vigilant, phoned Detective James, who came that evening, carefully examining the envelope. No prints. No sender info, he stated pensively. Whoever sent it wants to remain unknown. David paced restlessly. Is it a threat, a warning? Or somebody toying with us? Owen squeezed his dinosaur in silent apprehension. Could it be about Shaw or Landon? Something they never told us? Detective James nodded. It's possible. Men like Shaw and Landon often have hidden layers. Catherine asked worriedly, can't you investigate? James grimaced. I can try, but without leads, there isn't much I can do. After he left, the O'Connors gathered, the unsettling note resting on the coffee table like an unwelcome guest. Their recent joy was tainted by resurfacing shadows. Over the next few days, they attempted to resume daily life, but the letter lurked at the back of their minds. Owen couldn't stop rereading it. The truth isn't always what it seems. Was there a piece of evidence left overlooked? Then one night, while flipping through his diary, Owen recalled the ledger, its revelations about Shaw's and Mitchell's crimes. Mom, Dad, he called, running into the living room. Do you think Detective James still has that ledger? David, startled, said, probably. Why? Owen bit his lip. What if the letter refers to something in there? Maybe we missed a clue. Catherine frowned. Owen, we finished that case. Shaw's behind bars. But what if the story isn't over? Owen pressed. What if there's more? David and Catherine exchanged glances. At last, David sighed. I'll call Detective James. It can't hurt to check. The following day, Detective James met them at the station, the ledger spread out on a table. Owen's pulse raced as he skimmed the entries, the same scrawled logs of payments, blackmail, and suspicious notes. Most of these are just financial transactions, James remarked. Withdrawals, hush money, that sort of thing. Anything specific we should be looking for? I'm not sure, Owen admitted. The letter mentioned truth not being what it seems. Could there be a hidden reference or code? They combed the ledger meticulously. Midway through, Owen spotted a detail, a payment to someone with the initials CT, just weeks prior to Mr. Atkins's attack. Who's CT? Owen asked, pointing. Detective James frowned. We never identified that. It wasn't directly relevant to the initial case. What if it is relevant now? Owen wondered. Maybe CT is the letter's author? James leaned closer. Let me run those initials through our records. Days later, James phoned with another update. We found the identity of CT, a former partner of Shaw named Carson Tate. They had a falling out years back. David asked, does Tate know anything about the assault? We're unsure, James admitted. But here's the twist. Tate disappeared around the time Shaw was arrested. Owen's stomach swooped. Disappeared? Like he's on the run. It's possible, James replied. Or maybe he's the one who sent that letter. We're following the lead, but it'll take time. Weeks slid by with no sign of Carson Tate or further letters. Life settled into a tentative normal. David took a part-time job at a bakery. Catherine continued her nursing duties, and Owen returned to school, investing time in the Brave Voices Foundation. Yet the memory of that letter never quite faded. One evening, while they relaxed together, Owen asked his dad, do you think we'll ever learn who wrote that letter? David squeezed his son's shoulder gently. Maybe. But even if we don't, it doesn't undo everything we accomplished. We found the truth we needed. Owen managed a small smile, feeling an odd sense of closure. The ominous note had opened a new question, but it didn't define them. Their story was one of resilience, courage, and love. No cryptic message could change that. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky gold, Owen gazed out the window, heart brimming with cautious optimism. He understood now that truth was rarely simple. But he had also learned it was worth pursuing, no matter the risks. Whatever fresh challenges lay in wait, he knew his family would tackle them, together.